Welcome back to Generations Gaming. My name is Alex Shannon. This is Nathan Green over here.
Hey.
And Samuel Gottschall is returning.
Hello.
This episode we were talking about the Sega Dreamcast. By the way, Nate, if you could send me a video file of the Sega Dreamcast starting up without a game in it, I would appreciate that.
Yep. PAL or NTSC.
And I don't think it matters on the internet.
Yeah, well, it really kind of does.
Okay.
Oh, the hell, I'll just go for all.
I'll
just go for all
I
of
think
them.
we should try to...
So, let's talk about the history of it. In
I think we should
1990...
start
Well,
early on.
History. Okay, here's the link. Anyways, all of the history of it then. Well, this is a good one. Now, I've done a lot of research on this, so I pretty much know the history of the Dreamcast like the back of my hand, really. So, it really just started out when the Saturn had a bit of a failing. Thanks to its dual CPU architecture,
And
Sega
because
was
they weren't bringing all
having
those arcade ports over.
Because of all of that, they were failing again. The Saturn was failing against its main prime competitor, the PlayStation, the Sony PlayStation, and even though.
How about,
that was primarily
you guys,
that was main.
You guys, wait a minute. How about we have Nathan go first with his region, and then we'll talk about our region. So, since we're in two separate, we should probably mention that.
Yeah.
Is that Nate's from a different region than
that
me and
makes
Alex.
sense. Because if you couldn't already tell by his accent, he's from the PAL regions, we're from the NTSC regions, and so I think we should let...
We'll go with him first since he already started, so...
Well, so things started out with so it was failing against the Saturn was failing against the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64, mainly because of Sega's decision to throw in a second CPU at the last minute, making software development extremely difficult.
One more thing I'd like to say is they also pushed the launch date backs from Saturn Day so that they could get it out before the PlayStation did, but that made sure they didn't have a whole lot of launch titles.
Did that happen in New Zealand, or that happened in North
sometimes
America?
we get, and there was a bit of a disaster with the Dreamcast over here, which I'll get to. So Sega, knowing that they were in a bit of between a rock and a hard place, had to push out a new console. So they devised the world's first 128-bit console. This is what the PlayStation 2 would be like, 128-bit CPU.
Except it wasn't. It was 32-bit.
Yeah. Well, and so they pushed out the first 128-bit game system, the Dreamcast, and they were pushing this hard. They had the first 3D Sonic title on there, which is about time after the failure of Sonic Extreme, which we should probably do sometime, which never came out really. So the Dreamcast was pushed as the game changer. It was passed by slogans in such as the US as "It's thinking." Over here is over in Europe and the UK, and I think here is oh my god, I forgot it. It was pushed over here as well. It was very important. In Japan it was released in 1998 in Japan. It was quite a bit of a success there, and it was released on, as we all know, 9/9/1999 in the US. Oh man, I still love that date. And over here, it was released at a bit of a later date, and there was a few problems with that, which I'll get to soon. But so the Dreamcast was released, and for the first couple of years, it did very well. That was until Sony announced the PlayStation 2, and that was where everything started to go pear-shaped. Now, this is where the whole thing of brand reliability came in. Sega, for the previous console generation, had a lot of trouble with actually getting keeping brand reliability up. They the Saturn had failed, and there wasn't exactly people really relying on them. The PlayStation 1, on the other hand, had a huge cult following, so there was people hyped for the PlayStation 2. And this is probably where some of the biggest disasters of gaming history actually occurred, in my opinion. With the PlayStation 2 being announced, the sales of the Dreamcast started to drop. So Sony was pushing this thing for the Christmas season, and there was people pre-ordering it left, right, and centre. That was until something happened that could have helped push Sega forward. Sony had announced that for the Christmas season they would only be able to ship half of the PlayStation 2s that had been pre-ordered. Sega thought of this as as a way to actually push out their consoles, but this is where probably one of the craziest things happened. People pretty much literally proclaimed that I would rather have nothing, no game console for Christmas, no PlayStation 2 than Dreamcast.
What?
Yeah. Massive kick to the pants. So Sega went through price cutting. They first cut the price to around, I think, $200, then $150, then $50 for the consoles, and around $15 for the games. And then they literally started giving out free consoles on the last few days before unfortunately taking it off the market.
Oh man, I wish I'd have been into consoles back then.
Yeah, awesome. It was really sad how I was really sad how it was taken off the market, though. I mean, it had so much potential. It had so much for it. It had a lot of potential. But over here was where it had probably the worst success story, which is probably where it had the least success. And it's also why when you buy a Dreamcast on the internet here, they can cost up to $100 and something just for a working console. Now over here there was a few problems. One, there was this problem of the swirl. Now, in Japan, the swirl was orange, so yeah, that was fine. In Europe, when it was released overseas in the West to the USA, the swirl was red, and it would have been red for Europe if it weren't for one problem. A company called Trevolia, who made educational games. Now, how the logo was spelled.
I believe they were German, right?
In Trevolia. Yeah, Trevolia was a German company, and they filed a lawsuit against Sega because of the Dreamcast swirl, because the O in Trevolia's logo was a red swirl, and I know this because I have actually, when I was younger, played some of these games. And so Sega, knowing that they had to get it out there, they changed the colour of the swirl to blue, and this delayed them a bit with the release over here, albeit I do like the blue swirl more. It looks really nice.
Mm-hmm. Same.
It also makes it easier to distinguish the colours. I mean, I think it looks nice compared to the blue, and it means that your cases have got a nice blue colour to them. Second problem. When it came here, customs and immigration were being a bit of a douche about it. They were actually held some of the games and consoles up in customs and immigration, mainly because of the fact that because of law problems and etc. It was a bit of a thing. Hang on. It was
like with Australia.
What had happened was it had gotten held up. A lot of the Sega, it said apparently the Sega developed software had gotten held up in customs and couldn't reach the store shelves. As well as that, what also couldn't reach the market over in Australia and New Zealand on launch date was the VMUs, or the memory cards, and pretty much any other peripherals. Pretty much. If you bought a Dreamcast, you wouldn't be able to get a memory card because that was held up in customs, as well as all the other extra peripherals. So,
awful.
So use the
on the
internet
release
browser.
date, on the release date, November 30th, 1999, the only games that could have been released here on launch day, there was 9 games released on launch day, and none of them were first-party Sega games because they were held up in customs.
Why would they be held up in customs?
It was like, good question. I'm starting to think that Sony bribed them.
Oh.
But the thing is, there was no VMUs, peripherals, anything on the market, and so it just fell into the background. That's why I'd never even heard of the Dreamcast until I read a book about it and found it on the internet. But it'd only been the software that was held up in customs Sega developed could not reach the store shelves by release date, and so it really, people didn't feel like buying it. And after what seemed like pretty much infinite delays, they finally reached the shelves, but people just weren't bothered then. And so, in the end, fans over here of Sega just deserve better. I mean, we got hardly any games over here on launch day, even though I wasn't alive I was alive on launch day. I wasn't 1 year old though, but the system had no games. It literally had no games on launch day here because they were just held up, and everyone was just like, well, if it doesn't have any games, we're just gonna go with the PS2. Mm-hmm. And that is why it's so rare to find a Dreamcast over here. I mean, on the internet, Dreamcasts. Hang on. On the internet, I paid $120 for my Dreamcast, had two games, Toy Commander and Sonic Adventure, which had the front of the case as a bit munted. It came with the console, which was in decent condition with no yellowing. One controller, which had the joystick was a little bit mushy, but I fixed that. A VMU, which had the cap on it, which is nice because those things are lost quite easily. And all the cables. That cost me $120, but other prices over here, for example, the gun controller goes for $30, as the arcade stick goes for $35, VMU and the Rumble Pack goes for around $50, games can go for around $79, $40, etc. Controllers can go for like $15, and consoles themselves, a starter pack for a console. So this is a starter pack for a Dreamcast, which has quite a few games, console, 2 controllers, I think a VMU, and some other things. It went $300. They cost a lot here, and that's why having one of them is a real challenge. And I mean, that's why, when I got mine, after a while it started having a few disk reading issues. So knowing that I wasn't going to pay another $120 for one, I went with a large screwdriver and a jeweler's screwdriver, and followed some guides on adjusting the laser. And now the thing is reading all of my games. That's GD-ROMs and buttons, all perfectly first try. Yep, all that first try. And that brings me to another thing I need to mention.
Holy crap!
The Dreamcast and piracy. Now, when Sega released these things, they came out with technology known as GD-ROMs, and this is also another thing I should mention.
Data audio.
The GD-ROMs held around 1.2 gigabytes of data, and the Dreamcast was the only console that used them. This is another thing that I should mention why the Dreamcast had failed, and that was the DVD player. Now, the Dreamcast did not have a DVD player. The PlayStation 2 did, and DVD players at the time were relatively new and very expensive. Now, when the PlayStation 2 was announced, it was the cheapest DVD player on the market.
Wow.
So the main reason that people bought that thing was to watch DVDs on it. They bought that, so most people bought PlayStation 2s to watch DVDs on them. And the thing is, because the Dreamcast had used a GD-ROM drive and not a DVD-ROM, they couldn't. People didn't bother buying a Dreamcast, and it faded into the background. They were going to release a DVD player,
add-on,
a DVD player accessory. Yeah, but it was never released, and it faded into the background. It was going to be a version to keep it. It was going to be a version of the Dreamcast to keep it competitive with the PS2, but it was never released because of price cuttings and the fact the Dreamcast was failing. So it faded into the background. But back to what I was saying. GD-ROMs, they held 1.2 gigs of data, and
sort of like the
one
DVDs
track contained
for the
yeah.
Like
GameCube.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Sega Smash Packs Volume 1. It's got Chris Redfield on the front of it, but it's but it doesn't have any Resident Evil games on it.
Yeah, that's a really weird thing, isn't it?
I don't know
you know
either,
something
but...
interesting about that game? Is they have actually, inside the game's code, the guy put a line to tell people, bootleggers, how to go and, like, load in ROMs and stuff into it.
Yeah, I know. I read about that. They actually hid that in the code because in the end, this is one thing I'd like to bring up: the Dreamcast and piracy and homebrewing. Now, one thing that when it comes to the Dreamcast is the fact that Sega, when using these GD-ROMs, they wanted to do what, well, the GameCube kind of wanted to do what the Dreamcast did, so they kind of did what Nintendo would do with the GameCube, because that hadn't been released yet, and make a proprietary CD format. And this meant that it couldn't be read by a computer, or so they thought.
Right.
It is actually possible to read these discs in a computer by either using a special drive to change it to the data track, or by plugging your Dreamcast into your computer through the modem. And I will bring the modem up later. So in the end, people actually easily got these discs. But then the second problem came, and that was Mill CD. Now, Mill CD was a thing that was, which was on the Dreamcast. It was hardly ever used, though. It was going to be used a bit, but then that was when an exploit was found. And that exploit was in the form of the Utopia boot disk. And this disk, you could burn this disk to a CD, put it in your Dreamcast, and you could basically load backups with it.
And with backups, it's piracy.
Yep. Now, what happened? Now, Sega patched this up with later versions of the Dreamcast in the US and Japan, in the US and Japan, but over here in the PAL region, they never fixed up that Mill CD bug. So the Utopia boot disk still works on the Dreamcast, and it does work on mine. But with that exploit conked out, they found another, self-booting, as it's called. Basically, a method to basically have the disk self-boot without the need of a boot disk. This was an exploit in its own right entirely, and it got them right past any kind of exploit and patching that Sega could do. So, and it still works today on a lot of Dreamcasts. Mm-hmm. Self-booting basically allows you to run these games like they were actual games. It works fine.
And they also they do stuff like they make stereo sound with it, downsize the padding files in the video, so they'll fit onto a standard CD.
Yes, and so that's the thing. Since, as I mentioned, GD-ROMs held 1.2 gigs of data. Now, which means you're gonna have trouble fitting it onto a standard CDR. Well, there was on the GD-ROMs a whole bunch of random space that wasn't needed, and what they do is they can compress the files and make the game smaller. Or a lot of the time that you might find you may need to overburn the CD or something.
Or remove a whole lot of padding.
Not really. Normally you can just download the ISO and burn it straight to the CD with Disk Juggler.
Yeah, there's only a few things where, depending on if they use above like the regular CD of 700 MB, then you have to either find some edited version where they lowered the quality of some of the audio or stuff or something like that.
Yeah.
If not, then pretty much you could just burn it straight up.
Yeah, I noticed that Sonic Adventure had that.
Sonic Adventure 2 had that issue because I tried that once my copy was too scratched to work properly. I mean, it was really weird because it had all the characters in the background were just winged things, and like all the audio was completely horrible.
But when it comes to that, people found this exploit, and Sega didn't get around to patching it, so most Dreamcasts can still use this exploit, and this meant the homebrew community opened up, and the Dreamcast is like the home of homebrew. You've got emulators on there for like... Yeah, but you've got emulators on there for pretty much anything under the beaten sun. You can even emulate the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 on there, albeit at around 9 frames a second, but it can be done.
Well, actually, Metal Gear Solid it works pretty good on the Dreamcast for as
And I'll
as long
come
as I
to
know.
I'll come to that. I'll come to
Bleamcast,
that.
yeah.
And this is where one emulating story came in. Bleamcast. Now, Bleamcast was it wasn't official, but it was a PlayStation 1 emulator for the Dreamcast.
Emulator.
Mm-hmm.
The first commercial
And when this
emulator
came
also
out,
for the PC.
now when Bleamcast came out, it was, it supported, a few games, Gran Turismo 2, Metal Gear Solid, and I think one other. And it works pretty well, except for a few things. One, you needed a whole VMU to actually save a game, which was a bit dumb.
Even though
And
the memory cards on the PS1 were like 1 megabyte.
and two, there was a lack. Due to the lack of buttons on the controller, you sometimes may find yourself missing a few buttons. For example, the Dreamcast's controller only had 2 analog triggers, whereas the PlayStation controller had 2 shoulder buttons on each side. So with a total of 4 shoulder buttons.
Well, I'm gonna bring something up here about Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. You could easily. What? Were you about to bring that up?
Snake sounds.
Oh.
No, I was just gonna make snake sounds because
Let's
that's what
continue.
Well, anyways, like I was gonna say, you could easily assign L1 and R1 to both the triggers, and then L2 and R2 to the triggers as well, because Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes and Metal Gear Solid 2 and, well, Metal Gear Solid 3 as well also did this. So that would work. But N64 emulation, no. Not enough buttons.
But when it came to so Bleamcast it worked with a few games, but it was taken off the market due to lawsuits. Duh. But
still sold on Amazon though.
Homebrew people didn't give up there. They actually made a version of Bleamcast, which is compatible with all PlayStation 1 games, so you can get versions of Bleamed PlayStation 1 games which have them but already on there with the emulator, or you can get a version of Bleamcast where you can swap in a PlayStation 1 disc and it'll load that up, albeit not all games are compatible. And it actually, I've tried this before, it actually runs at a very playable speed. Sound works normally, on a lot of games. It runs at, full frames, it works perfectly. And it's actually very impressive. A lot of the games work perfectly, some of them have glitches, and it's very impressive, actually.
That's cool.
But then, as mentioned, the Dreamcast again was the king of homebrew. It had a lot of games, homebrew stuff on there, and there is already a lot of homebrew stuff on there. You've got VMU patches, you've got mini game things, you've got a whole bunch of homebrew games. And the thing is, because homebrew scene is so open.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the first console that supported DLC.
It's funny also to think about DLC via dial-up.
Everybody thinks about DLC on the Xbox, but they never talk about DLC on the Dreamcast.
We'll get to that. But the homebrew on the Dreamcast was pretty impressive, and also, because the Dreamcast has an active homebrew scene today, there were people actually still releasing homebrew games today. There was a couple of games released this year for the Dreamcast as homebrew.
I actually noticed that it was cross-plat with the Xbox 360 and PC.
It's very impressive. But moving from there, I mean, it was very impressive how it did it. Also, a nice little thing of the GD-ROMs was that there was also an audio track on them, so if you put them into your
CD
into
player?
your computer or your CD player, it would normally you'd normally have something reading out saying, "This is a Dreamcast disc, please put it in your Dreamcast." Or in the case of Skies of Arcadia, you'd have something saying like, "Hey, we can't do our job on a CD player, put us in the Dreamcast, we can do our job." Which is pretty clever. But then
sort of like how Xbox discs do that when you put it in a DVD player, or say, put this game in an Xbox console. You put an Xbox 360 disc in an Xbox console when it tells you this is an Xbox 360 disc, not a DVD.
Does it?
Yeah,
Wow.
because I stuck Left 4 Dead into the Xbox.
Wow. Anyways, but then this came to the most interesting feature of the Dreamcast, and this was online play. This was the first actual console that actually supported online play out of the box. You pulled it out of the box, and there was a 56k modem plugged in. Now, I say 56k, and this is because it's dial-up, so, you know, the whole noises that you get when you try to dial.
Yeah.
But this console did it well. Games worked online. You had games like Quake 3 and Phantasy Star Online, and a whole
Wait a
ton
minute.
of
How
them,
did
which
Quake 3 work on a Dreamcast?
It has a
Very
it has
well,
mouse
actually.
and keyboard support.
Yeah,
Oh, mouse
It has
and
there was a
keyboard
mouse and
support?
keyboard.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
There was a
the
mouse and
Dreamcast.
keyboard
I owned the
accessory.
keyboard.
Yeah, I
I
know
have
about the keyboard accessory.
I've got a converter for my Dreamcast, which I can use to plug PS2 devices in there, PS/2 devices in there to use them as like mouse and keyboard, etc. But
Not PlayStation 2, PS/2.
yep, that's what I said.
Yeah.
But so these games worked online very well, and normally if you signed up to Sega's own ISP, SegaNet, you get a free Dreamcast to play online, and there was a load of games on there. Choo Choo Rocket was a really good puzzle game to play online. It was just like, wow. And then it was the first console to actually have DLC, and this was no pay DLC. It was free stuff. For example, and you can still use this DLC today, even if you don't have the internet, because thanks to programs which allow you to load VMU saves on there. Because what this DLC basically does, it would save onto your VMU, and it would unlock something already on the disc.
So it was on this DLC.
Pretty
Yeah,
much.
but it also didn't cost any money, so...
Yeah, which is a good
Yeah.
thing.
So, for example, for Sonic Adventure, you'd have a few a bit of DLC which would add extra voices to the menus, or make Station Square all decked out with Dreamcast logos and balloons for the launch dates and everything. It was really cool. And then there was also, and it worked very well. And the online play was definitely what was really the driving point of the Dreamcast. People bought it for that, and had a cult following for that. But then when the Dreamcast was discontinued, so was SegaNet and Dream Arena.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't play online anymore. But the homebrew community wouldn't stand for that. And it's still possible to get online with a total of 6 games: Phantasy Star Online, Quake 3, 4x4X pool game, and Sega Swirl, and another game.
There's a project that someone's working on, actually, that's gonna be you're gonna be able to play with your Dreamcast online, and there's something about chat support. I forget what the game is.
You know, something they actually did make.
Wow.
They actually did make a DSL
Microphone
modem for it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
That's
it's
very
really
rare,
rare.
though.
It's about as rare as the dial-up modem for the GameCube.
Yeah, I've got the
except
dial-up
for this
modem
one's
for the
actually
Dreamcast.
useful.
So
This one's actually useful.
let's look at
It's
the
still-
launch titles.
Hang on, one more thing. We might, again, with the hub, there was the modem and everything, and that was a real good fun thing, and you can still play online with it. But we haven't covered probably one of the coolest factors of it, which was the VMU.
Oh yeah, the Game Boy thing.
The visual memory units.
Yeah.
Or VMS as it was called in the USA. It was called VMU here.
It was called VMU here too.
Really? Yeah, I thought it was called VMS.
VMS.
Yeah. Anyways,
I'm gonna
now this little gadget slotted into the top of your controller, and
A la the
had a little
Rumble Packs and stuff for the N64.
memory card slot. Yeah, and you would slide it in there, and it was a little. There was a little screen on it, and as well as some game buttons, and there was a little hole in your Dreamcast controller where you could see the screen through. And when you played a game, you could sometimes see things on the screen.
Oh,
For example, in Sonic Event.
I'm gonna interject right here. the Resident Evil games for the Dreamcast had your health and ammo status displayed on on the VMU, and that would go on to be featured in Resident Evil Deadly Silence for the DS, if that wasn't obvious from the title, and Resident Evil Revelations for the 3DS. But please go on. I'm sorry.
I believe those ports were actually way smoother than the original PlayStation version, and the only reason I could see in playing the PlayStation version over those is for the fact that nostalgia and the fact that everybody
nostalgia
PlayStation version. And also the controller scheme's slightly different. I believe it uses the Japanese layout.
Oh yeah, that's like That's
still,
like
the VMU
port
was
of, Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil Revelations, because I'm just gonna say something right here. Resident Evil games for the Xbox 360 got butchered with the controls. You gotta get used to them. You really do. But,
anyways.
Yeah. Dreamcast. Sorry.
Don't get off top. The VMU, so you'd see little things on this screen as the VMU as you played. Sometimes you'd see, for example, Sonic Adventure, you had the characters, you had the faces of the characters flashing on the screen. But then it had more innovative purposes. For example, in Skies of Arcadia, you'd have a little thing which would be on your VMU, and it would make noises when you got close to hidden items. Or and by far the coolest feature was the ability to load minigames on it. And the most known one is probably Chow Adventure from Sonic Adventure. You'd load that onto your VMU, you take it out of your controller, and this is where the buttons came in. You could play this little minigame on your VMU as you went around, and your Chow would walk along, and sometimes you get into little battles and things, and
like Pokemon?
etc. It was really cool. Yeah, but like that.
Kinda.
Except for one
not
except for one problem.
Also, the battery.
Except for a few problems, and that was one, the battery life. The VMU plows through batteries like Pac-Man, who's had his power pellets seeded with steroids. It chows through these two little button batteries, and yeah, it's not very nice to having to change it. And if you don't change them every time you power the console, and you get a loud shrill beep noise, which you can probably get. I can probably get a recording of that to add into the video for those people who haven't heard that noise. If you've heard it before, then the nostalgia factor is insane, but yeah. And then there's also the problem of the fact that the VMU's storage space is tiny. My VMU, I only have one VMU for my Dreamcast, and it's nearly full, and I've only got like 10 games really for it. It fills up very, very, very quickly, and you have to. And the problem being, if you want to use the mini games, you've really got to have a separate VMU, because it's not very
did that, so.
It's not very practical having to really put a mini game on a VMU, because you'll have to delete some files, and it's not very useful. But it was a clever little device, and if it had more storage space, it would be even better. I mean, also if it didn't plow through batteries a million miles an hour.
They actually did make a version of it without the screen and buttons. That was larger.
There's one of those actually there's one of them for sale over here, which I was thinking of maybe picking up. It was only released in Japan. But it was it was a clever little device. I mean, also considering you could have up to 8 of these things plugged into your Dreamcast at once if you had all 4 controller sockets filled up with a VMU in each of the 2 expansion ports. And it was pretty damn clever though. And you could just do quite a few things with this little gadget. I mean, normally the second slot would have the Rumble Pack in it, which is pretty damn awesome for a Rumble Pack. I mean, it's better than the input than the Rumble you get in PlayStation controllers, really. But yeah, so that's really all to talk about the hardware. So we should probably get the software for the system.
Okay.
I think we should mention the Naomi quickly.
Oh yeah, the Sega Naomi.
Oh yeah, the Naomi. was
Naomi
basically
pretty
it was
much
an arcade
version of the Dreamcast, sort of like
Arcade. It was an
the
arcade
Triforce was an arcade version of the GameCube.
Yeah, it pretty much
and
was
the-
legitimately the same architecture, except for you could stack multiple Naomis together to pretty much run games a lot smoother and whatnot, and it had a separate GD-ROM, which if you could get that or use them in a kind of, I don't know how to describe what format the games were in. They were in some kind of weird cartridge-esque thing that attached to the board.
Yeah, but that meant that most Naomi games could get ported to the Dreamcast quite easily. For example, Puyo Pop Fever had an arcade release, and it did get a limited release 1.1 port to the Dreamcast. Well, it was released near the end of the Dreamcast's lifespan, but Ikaruga was another example. That was a Naomi game, and that got a 1.1 port to the Dreamcast, which is amazing.
One thing I'm going to point out here is some people actually prefer the Sega Saturn versions of some arcade ports over the Sega Dreamcast versions of them, because they're apparently a whole lot closer.
Yeah, well, then also
Yes,
the Dreamcast
really
versions came later, and they weren't like exact ports, so...
Still, with software, so I guess we should really start off with the killer of the Dreamcast, which had to be Sonic Adventure. That was the one that everyone knew. And
Take that, Sopa.
it's a
no!
It's a pretty awesome game. The Dreamcast version was the one that really brought it to its glory. It looks amazing compared to PlayStation games and early PS2 games. It's got a lot of stuff in there. Albeit there were a few things that really needed to be fixed. For example, the Comic Sans MS font for the text, which and also the fact that the frame rate was locked at 30 and it jerks quite a bit, and that's why I prefer the PC version, because the Dreamcast version, however good it is to play on the actual console, has frame rate issues severely. It doesn't run at the full 60 frames per second that the console is actually capable of. It runs at around 30 and drops every so often in certain areas, so it can get quite laggy and jerky and look a bit awful. And if they actually
fixed
patch
that with GameCube port.
Yeah, they did. And the PC version, in Director's Cut.
There were a few.
But the original.
There was a few Dreamcast games ported to the GameCube.
Yeah, Adventure 2.
They're mostly solid titles. Adventure 2 was ported. Adventure was redone with a whole bunch of extras. Skies of Arcadia had some of the DLC stuff kind of set up for it. There was Evolution 1 and 2 were semi-combined into one game called Evolution Worlds. And I think that covers most of the ports of the GameCube.
It got a lot of ports.
Yeah. Let's see. Sonic Adventure, Arrow Wings.
Sonic Adventure 2. Sonic Adventure 2 was another game, though. Yeah. Sonic Adventure 2 was another game on the console, really, that was everyone seems to know. The only reason I played this one more than my Dreamcast version of Adventure is a game.
Nate? Nate? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah. Yep.
Your
I
microphone.
think you cut out.
What? Am I hit back? You on?
Can you hear us?
You got me?
Yeah.
There we go. Right, so as I was saying, the reason I really like the Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure 2 is the fact that it runs at a silky smooth 60 frames a second. Which is really nice compared to Adventure 1's jerking along quite slowly, which isn't exactly ideal.
Considering he is the fastest thing alive, he needs to go very fast.
Yeah. Adventure 2 fixed those frame rate issues, and that's the only reason why I play it a little bit more, because it's so damn smooth, and it really shows off what the Dreamcast can do. The graphics of Adventure 2 are absolutely amazing. They're on par with PlayStation 2.
Wait.
Pretty
Are
impressive.
we talking about Metal Gear Solid 2 PlayStation 2 or Final Fantasy X PlayStation 2? Because if we're talking Final Fantasy X PlayStation 2, then...
I think we
Anything
shouldn't
really,
talk
but
about Final Fantasy 2 PlayStations at all.
Yeah.
Because those... Oh, also it's another thing is... I guess there's no Square support at all for the Dreamcast. That's kind of something the vendors really didn't have.
Yeah. Because even the...
But that didn't really weigh it down much, because... They didn't weigh it down much because there was a host of good RPGs for that, mainly Skies of Arcadia, which is spanned over 2 discs and was an amazing... It's an amazing game.
2.
Graphics are awesome. Yeah, Grandia 2.
2
my goodness, that game is awesome.
Grandia 2 was ported to the PS2. What all other PS2 ports were there? Besides Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Albeit though the PS2 and PC port of Grandia 2 was inferior to the Dreamcast version because of a few graphical glitches.
Oh yeah.
And the PC had a graphical glitch on the final boss, and the PS2 version had some frame rate issues, and also the sound quality was dropped big time. So, which is a real pity because the soundtrack for Grandia 2 is absolutely astounding.
Also,
that's kind of bizarre.
Because the DVD has a larger format, so you think they would be able to work around that somehow or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, and
weird.
One more thing. Resident Evil 2 came on 2 discs, although even though it could hold twice, no, it couldn't hold twice as much. It could hold 1.2 gigabytes, but they managed to fit Resident Evil 2 onto a single DVD-ROM for the GameCube. So how did they manage to fit it onto a single whole 1.2 gigabyte GameCube disc when they couldn't put it on a single 1.2 gigabyte compression? But they also had...
Yeah, they probably learned it over time.
Oh yeah,
There's methods.
because the GameCube's visuals, not the visuals, the FMV. The FMV for Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 looks awful.
Yeah. Compression on that part.
Which is strange, because the textures look a little bit better.
Still, the Dreamcast had some great RPGs. It had, as mentioned, it had Skies of Arcadia, amazing game, amazing graphics. Grandia 2, amazing soundtrack, graphic. The graphics of Grandia 2 are awesome. It's got voice acting in some areas as well. It's just amazing. And then there's a whole bunch of other games on the system which were really good. Quake 3 was a really good version, especially when you played with the mouse and keyboard. Soul Calibur, oh man. That is just like exclusion.
There was a pretty solid fighting game lineup for the Dreamcast.
Yeah, they had...
Yeah, the Dreamcast was a very solid fighting game lineup.
There's several
Soul Calibur had
games, games.
They had... Didn't they have Rival Schools for the Dreamcast?
Yeah. Yeah, there was Rival Schools. There was Galu, Mark of Wolves / Real, Fatal Fury, Mark of Wolves.
Oh yeah, I've got that for the PS2.
But yeah, I mean, there was a whole bunch of those games. Soul Calibur Soul Calibur has a little bit of an Easter egg that if you plug a keyboard into the second port, it can act as a second player controller. Which is pretty clever. It is, but it works really well. Then there was a lot of Japanese exclusives for the Dreamcast. From what I've read, there's quite a few visual novels, which of course never made it over here.
Right.
Ikaruga, Ikaruga, which was an awesome game. And if you manage to get the burn the Dreamcast version like I have, play that game. I mean, the Dreamcast version runs at 60 FPS, 60 frames a second. You can actually turn the display as well, to sideways as well, or straight up, or verts, and etc. And in the VMU screen actually comes in handy. It shows you how high your chain is and everything instead of showing it on screen. It's quite useful, and it's just damn awesome game.
I'm going to mention another thing. The Wii U does similar stuff, too. Because of the screen in the middle of the controller. Only it does it a whole lot, probably does it a whole lot better because the screen is big and in color.
Yeah. But this was 1999. Give the cut Dreamcast some slack.
I am cutting some slack because it was, like you said, 1999, and there wasn't a whole lot of stuff like this. It's just the natural successor.
Jet Set Radio. Man, oh man, where to start with this game?
No,
probably one of Sega's most... AKA Jet Grind Radio in the USA, Jet Set Radio over here, or over in Europe, here, or in Japan.
Why would they call it Jet Grind Radio here, not Jet Set Radio? Because they thought
a good question.
Because they thought people would think it was a flying game and not a skateboarding game. Because they called it Jet Set Radio when they ported it.
With the new version,
Still, where's the start of that game? It's absolutely astounding. The graphics are wow. Really cool cel-shaded graphics. It's the one that really started cel-shaded graphics. And it's got a pretty cool soundtrack, quite clever, very innovative. Since the Dreamcast was home to a lot of innovative titles, there was Choo Choo Rocket, which was a really good puzzle game. And the online play on that was quite good. Pretty hilarious just to do stuff like that. There was Samba de Amigo, which was pretty good game, especially when you had the maracas, and it had a bit of DLC to that too. And then there was also Space Channel 5, that was really good. Then there was also you also had Phantasy Star Online. Oh man, that game is amazing. And also one of my personal favourites, Rez, which was it was ported to the PS2. I think it was only released in Japan and Europe here. Hang on, not Raz. Oopsies, Rez. Hang on.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Hang on.
The developers of Rez went on to make a game for the Kinect.
Yeah, the Rez was originally only released in Japan and Europe on the Dreamcast. I have the Dreamcast version, but it was released over in the US when it came on the PS2 and XBLA. It's a really, really good game. I mean, if you put some headphones on and listen to that, it's like, wow. It's just very good game. Quite arcadey, got a good soundtrack. It's one game which you really want to play. And there was just so many Dreamcast exclusive titles that just were absolutely astounding. And a lot of these found their way onto consoles after the Dreamcast was discontinued. But back then, the Dreamcast was the home of innovation. But there was one thing as well. EA Sports wasn't involved in the Dreamcast because of the fact that of what happened with the Saturn. And so what Sega had to do is make their own games. So they made games like NBA, 2K, whatever it was, and NFL and etc. And they were really good. I mean, the Dreamcast has a lot of sports games on it, and even though I'm not a sports game fan, there were quite a few on there. And there's just an absolute ton of games on this console. Is like, you've got online, you've got offline, you've got games like Banjo, which was like crazy game, Crazy Taxi. I forgot to mention that one. That is so funny. Dead or Alive, that was a really good one. You've got a whole ton of games. You've got Evolution and Evolution 2, some great RPGs. You've got Sega Rally Championship 2, which was awesome. Fur Fighters, that was a bit of a unique game, which was a third-person shooter. And it was really cool. It was a really cool little game. You mentioned Grandia 2. There was a lot of online
Resident
games.
Evil Code Veronica.
There was a lot of things like that. You had, as mentioned, you had Jet Set Radio. You had King of Fighters. You had Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which was an absolutely astounding game.
I think they must have butchered the port for the PS2 because I can't figure out how to switch characters that easily.
Yeah. They had Mortal Kombat Gold. They had, as mentioned, the NBA, 2K, and AFL, etc. You had As mentioned, Phantasy Star Online. You had a few other... Power Stone, I forgot to mention that. Power Stone and Power Stone 2 are amazing games. Really good fun. It's a bit like... It's basically Smash Brothers in 3D. It's really good. Probably the best version of Rayman 2 The Great Escape on the Dreamcast. It ran at a silky smooth 60 frames a second, had quite a few good extras, and the control scheme was amazing. As mentioned, you had Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Code Veronica.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something about Code Veronica here. It was the first Resident Evil title to debut on a non-Sony platform, in contrast to the first 3 games. Now, they didn't port the first Resident Evil because the first Resident Evil made its way onto the Sega Saturn and notably, the Sega Saturn version is the only official version of the first Resident Evil game, aside from the PC version.
Wow.
that is completely uncensored. So yeah,
Wow.
Resident Evil Code Veronica has 3D backgrounds instead of the pre-rendered ones,
2D stuff.
Which I'd actually think that they could use the pre-rendered backgrounds, because the GameCube had really high definition pre-rendered backgrounds. Now, another thing.
Then there was also...
You got something to say about this, or I was just gonna say one more thing.
Yeah, there was also a bunch of other games that you had. Seaman. Oh my gosh, that game is weird.
I wasn't.
Sega Bass Fishing and Bass Fishing 2.
I was actually about to say something about this. It came on 2 discs. The PS2 version is only like a couple of gigabytes if you remove the padding from the disc. And okay, one last thing I need to say. It's a major step down from Resident Evil 3, because unlike in Resident Evil 3, you gotta press a button to go upstairs.
Fail.
Right. So that's it.
There was Shamu, and Shamu 2 was only ever released in Japan and Europe. There was Sonic Shuffle and the Sonic games. You had Street Fighter Alpha 3 and some games like that on there. You had a lot of games on there. It was just like,
I guess we should
Toy Commander, and then there was...
I'm not entirely certain. Should we keep listing games, or...
I say that's pretty much the entire list of... Well, there's just a ton of games, and if I was going to list them all, we would run out of time.
Okay. I'm going to link you to an eBay page for there was this limited edition Biohazard Code Veronica console. Well, there were 2 of them. Came with a limited edition silver VMU, both of them. But that's the more common version that I just linked you to.
Yep.
You see that right there?
So
that is bright pink.
Let's load up. Are you kidding? Yeah, there was a lot of colours for the Dreamcast. You had translucent ones, and over here you didn't have many. You had pretty much the only colours you had were your normal one. Japan had a lot more colours. There was
because this right here doesn't even have. It has exactly one piece of Biohazard branding on it. Where it has a serial number on the back where it says Biohazard Code Veronica, Capcom logo, and the 1,353 out of 1,800 consoles made. If you were to get one of these, you want to get the Blue Stars version, because that one looks awesome, and it has the Stars logo on it.
Also, you can get the you can also get mod cases which you can put on the Dreamcast. There's so much you can do with it. And also, what's really cool about it is the fact it's a really, really little compact thing. I mean, it's small. If you took a netbook, it's a little bit. It's around the same. It's a little bit smaller on width than the netbook, and a bit bigger on height. So it's pretty good sizing. It's a tiny little thing.
How exactly would it compare to the Wii in size?
I did that. It's just a little. It's around the same size.
I'm gonna say something right here. Here, there was a Dreamcast that was built into a CRT TV released in Japan.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, the Divers 2000 CX1.
There's not many of them. I know.
Not many of them, and it probably doesn't have a TV out, so you can't use a better screen.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we should probably bring up one Dreamcast knockoff known as the Dreamcast. It was a Chinese knockoff of the Dreamcast, which was it had a picture. No, it actually was an actual Dreamcast, but it had a screen on it. It opened like a portable. It opened like a portable DVD player. I'll link you to a photo. It was actually a pretty good version of the Dreamcast. It had a built-in LCD screen, and it was a Dreamcast with a LCD screen in it. It was like a fold-out DVD player, really.
Huh.
Look, they're quite rare. But
one more thing, the VMUs included with the limited edition Biohazard Code Dreamcasts had a larger VMU than the normal
space.
More VMU space, yeah.
As in,
the limited
edition
silver VMU, for the
they need to add that in by norm.
Yeah, for the pre-order of Biohazard Code was had larger stuff than it. Yeah.
They should have put that in by default.
Right. I know, right?
Yep. There's already not enough space on them.
Let's see here. Yeah, it looks like what the Wikipedia page says, a PS1, sort of, except it's kind of blocky.
Yeah, it is. Still, I think we covered most to do with the Dreamcast, really.
Well, we didn't cover the fact that, it was the first console to have a web browser. There was a Hello Kitty version, which is actually
it was.
It's like smoky pink, and it actually looks like smoky red, and it actually looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's quite bizarre.
It's bizarre, but I wouldn't turn it down if somebody gave it to me.
Neither.
So yeah,
as a Dreamcast lover.
Right.
So that's pretty much.
Yeah, that's pretty much all you can say about it. But they didn't have a backwards compatibility with the Sega Saturn, which was
obviously.
Yeah, which was kind of not like that was kind of a bad thing because
no.
What?
It wasn't huge in the end.
Well, no, it probably wouldn't have saved it, but it definitely didn't help because if you could have played like Saturn games on it, you would have had 4 Resident Evil games on the system instead of just 3, and okay, hey, they also they Okay.
So that's
it. The controller is sort of angular, but it is pretty cool. If you haven't seen it,
to tell you the truth, the controller, it's similar to. It looks from the front. It looks similar to the Xbox, and it was the first controller to have analog triggers on it. And it is also probably one of the most comfortable controllers you will ever use. I mean, it slides into your hand and it fits perfectly. It's just, it looks uncomfortable, feels, in real life, brilliant.
Yep. I've actually held one before, and, well, despite probably never using a Dreamcast test in the past, I can actually say that would be a pretty good controller to use. Valve was working on porting Half-Life to the PS2, but it was unfinished.
The Dreamcast, and it is actually...
And the Dreamcast, yeah. And they finished it, but they didn't actually release it. Sort of like, well, Resident Evil 0 on the N64.
Yeah. A bit like that, but you can actually get the Dreamcast version of Half-Life, even though that was never released. It's dumped on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Still, I think that's pretty much all we got to cover about it.
Oh, there was no actual operating system on the Dreamcast, which that was probably part of the reason. Oh, excuse me. Why the Dreamcast had piracy issues.
Well, it ran off when it. One thing it did have was it ran off it had Windows CE compatibility to allow quick porting of Windows games.
Yeah.
And that worked. Quite a few games did use that.
Like Half-Life.
Yep. I think Quake 3 used it.
Okay. Hey, another thing. The it was Microsoft went on to port Windows XP to the Xbox, similarly to the way they ported Windows CE to the Dreamcast, and they also built the controller similarly. They used similar button coloring.
Basically, you can thank the
right.
You could thank the Dreamcast for having the existence of the Xbox. You could say that the Xbox wouldn't have existed without the Dreamcast.
Yeah. Oh, you could hook up a VGA cable to the Dreamcast and run it at 640 by 480p. Yeah, and that, for the time is pretty cool because you can look back, and see that was
astounding.
Revolutionary. And it was the third most powerful console of the sixth generation. The PS2 was the least powerful console of the generation, and despite being released afterwards, and that's very strange.
And the thing is, with the PS2, early games on the PS2 and some later games actually looked worse than pretty much all other games on the Dreamcast, mainly because of the fact that the Dreamcast was very. I forgot to bring this up, but it was very developer friendly. It was super easy to program, whereas the PlayStation 2, powered by the Emotion Engine, was quite a challenge to program for.
Mm-hmm. You just like I said about the Wii having bad graphics sometimes, all you've got to do is work at it. Lazy games mean it doesn't look that good. Metal Gear Solid 2 looks absolutely awesome. Metal Gear Solid 3, but you've got games
it does.
then you've got games like Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for the PS2, and that has choppy frame rates when you go into sandbox mode. It's got the character, her animation is weird, and it's it's
so
kind of choppy, even though and Final Fantasy X has some of the worst graphics things you could imagine. And for the PS2, you've got a game on the next generation console that looks like it belongs on the PlayStation. The FMV should have been all the cutscenes for that game.
Yeah.
So I guess next episode we'll talk about the PS2. I'll have to talk to Sam about that.
I'm guessing
PS2 or Xbox.
I was never much of a fan. Either or.
I'm personally more of a GameCube guy myself, although I usually get the PS2 version
Never
of the
owned
game
it.
because you can find most of those easier than the GameCube versions.
I never owned a GameCube.
So anyways, see you later. Or see you next week with more Generations Gaming. Nate?
Yep. Yeah.
Any-
Sorry.
You want me to link to your
Um,
channel? Hole in the
Well, not really
description?
many final comments.
Dreamcast, good
Might as well.
console, didn't have as good of a showing as it really should have.
It was an amazing console. It was just that the PS2 was the main killing factor. If the PS2 wasn't there, I think the Dreamcast would have risen to glory. But unfortunately, the PS2 was like the brick wall in its way. It ran like supersonic speed straight into it. So overall, I mean, if I was going to rank the Dreamcast, I'd probably give it like a 10. Pretty much. I'd probably give it a perfect 10. The only little gripe I have is the VMU battery, and that's nothing
and it
really
doesn't
huge
recharge
anyway.
from
I mean,
and it doesn't recharge from the Dreamcast.
yeah, but
Eh,
what you really need, but I mean, if you're over in the PAL region, you might have a bit of difficulty finding a Dreamcast for a cheap price. But if you do find one for a cheap price, buy it. If you're in the USA, there's quite a few Dreamcasts over there. So if you just see one around a thrift shop or on eBay or something for a good price, pick it up.
I don't really see that many around here. Or I saw a controller one time, but yeah.
Still, if you find one of them, just pick it up because
Definitely.
they're absolutely because they're amazing little gems of a console.
Anyways,
It's amazing.
yeah, like I said before, we'll see you next week with Generations Gaming. Adios and goodbye.